thank you for coming. I'm Michelle Yeager, this year's Student Body President. It's a pleasure to host this year's 4th District Forum. I believe that it's very important for everyone who can vote to make an informed decision before they cast their ballot. This event is a benefit to the student body and to the larger community alike. It gives them the chance to make an informed decision come this November. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Tri-City Regional Greater Pasco Area and West Richland Chamber of Commerce, the Tri-City Herald, the League of Women Voters of Benton and Franklin Counties, Richland City View TV, Charter Communications, and Columbia Basin College. And I'd also like to introduce our panelists. We have Rufus Friday, the publisher of the Tri-City Herald, Dennis Shannon of KONA Radio, and Whitney Ward from Keeper TV. And this is Judy Goldberg from the League of Women Voters, and thank you for everyone for showing up tonight.
Thank you, Michelle. This evening's forum is being presented by the Tri-City Coalition, the sponsors Michelle just named. We thank the student body of CBC for hosting. My name is Judy Goldberg, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Benton and Franklin Counties. Let me introduce our candidates for the 4th Congressional District. Alphabetically, Jay Clough, Democrat. Okay. And Richard Doc Hastings, Republican. Before we go further, first thing you need to do is turn off your cell phones. Your conversation could be recorded over the PA system, so please turn them off. The following format will be followed. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. The order of the speakers has been determined by a toss of the coin. Questions will then be asked by our distinguished panelists, and then a written question submitted by the audience. Question period will be repeated as time allows. Note cards are being handed out to the audience for written questions. Please raise your card when you have completed writing your questions, and they will be picked up by members of the coalition. Candidates will be given an opportunity to answer each question. 2 minutes are allowed for an answer. The first respondent can then have up to a minute for a rebuttal. At the end of the time period, candidates will then have 2 minutes for closing statements. Tonight's forum is being broadcast live on KONA Radio and taped by Charter Communications and Richland City View TV. A member of the League of Women Voters will serve as timer. A 1-minute paddle will be shown first, a 15-second, and then stop. For the speakers, when the timer indicates there is 15 seconds left, there is no need to stop talking in the middle of a sentence, but please wrap up what you're saying at that time. With a toss of the coin, we will begin tonight with Richard Doc Hastings. Mr. Hastings.
Thank you. In January of 2009, Nancy Pelosi was elected Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, and Barack Obama was sworn in as our president. While I didn't vote for either one, I respected the country's choice in the election of 2008. America was promised hope and change, but it only took a few short weeks until the real Obama-Pelosi agenda became clear. First, it was the $800 billion stimulus spending bill, followed by the $800 billion cap-and-trade national energy tax, another Wall Street bailout, the auto bailout, and a bailout for the states. Oh, and let's not forget Obamacare, the trillion-dollar big government takeover of our healthcare system. The Obama-Pelosi agenda has turned into a cascade of big spending, big government, and a refusal to listen to the will of the American people who oppose those policies. I'm standing strong against this agenda. I voted against all of the bailouts and I will vote to repeal Obamacare. When I ran my family's small business right here in Pasco, I learned how hard work, low taxes, and freedom create jobs. I believe the worst thing that we can do in a recession is to raise taxes, but that is exactly what Obama, Pelosi, and my Democrat opponent want to do by refusing to extend all of the Bush tax cuts. Not extending all of these tax cuts would mean a massive tax increase in January. The death tax would be reinstated. The marriage penalty would be back. The child tax credit would be cut in half, and income tax rates would go up for every taxpayer. Making this tax relief permanent would help businesses expand and create jobs. So I look forward to discussing all of these issues and other issues in more details tonight. And I would like to thank the panelists for being here and for those that are sponsoring this debate.
Thank you. Mr. Clough.
First, I'd like to welcome the Kamaikan High School class that's here getting 30 points of extra credit. I hope that this forum makes it worth your time. I'd like everyone to keep in mind that I'm not running against John Boehner, and Mr. Hastings is not running against Nancy Pelosi. This is about Representative Hastings' legislative record and about his and my future for the future of this district. This election is about we, the voters of Central Washington, and what we care about. We care about having jobs. We care about our veterans. We care about supporting our agricultural economy. And we care about keeping promises to our seniors. I will fight to protect the interests of Central Washington, which includes protecting our dams, promoting nuclear power, and protecting our Second Amendment rights. During this debate, Representative Hastings is probably going to tell you about our record national debt and how only he can save us from financial ruin. But he'll probably leave out a couple of important details. For example, from 1995, when Mr. Hastings took office and the Republican Party took Congress, until 2006, when the Democrats took Congress, the national debt increased by 170%. That's $3.5 trillion. Representative Hastings has been trying for months to tie Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid around my neck. But the fact of the matter is, after a decade and a half of too much spending and not enough leadership, Representative Hastings looks a heck of a lot more like Harry Reid or Nancy Pelosi than I do. Since the beginning of this year, I've been to every committee in the district multiple times. I've knocked on thousands of doors and driven tens of thousands of miles. I've talked to anyone who wanted to hear me and listened to everyone who wanted to tell me something. I've done this to provide an example of the type of representation we could have. A representative that cares more about his district than their career. A representative that cares more about good policy than about partisanship. And a representative that cares more about doing the people's work than about doing their party's bidding. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You keep in mind that the time that you clap, it also takes away from their speaking time. Not that we don't want to show enthusiasm. Okay, we'll go to our first panelist, Mr. Friday. And you please ask Mr. Clough the first question, and then Mr. Hastings will be able to answer the same question.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. My first question is, both of you happen to be military veterans, and I'd like you to talk about your position on the military's don't ask, don't tell policy.
Well, the very first question that I ever received when I started this race was this question. And I'll tell you the answer that I gave to that reporter. I think that most combat veterans would be offended at the idea that their professionalism would be affected by someone's sexuality. I'm an infantry Marine. I'm a professional. I was trained well to do a job. And I think that it's ridiculous to think that if I'm in a foxhole, whether or not someone else is doing something in their bedroom that I don't do or don't agree with is going to affect my ability to do my job. I'm a Marine, and I will do my job. And I think that's the end of the story.
Thank you. Before I answer directly that question, Mr. Clough said I'm not running against Nancy Pelosi. Yes, I am running against Nancy Pelosi in the Democrat Congress. The fact is, Mr. Clough cannot run away from the fact that he is supporting the Obama-Pelosi agenda. As far as don't ask, don't tell is concerned, I favor don't ask, don't tell. The military has been absolutely consistent on this fact that it causes potential morale problems and so forth in certain types of the military operations. So I am in favor of a don't ask, don't tell policy. However, the military is coming up with a study that's due to be released, I think, in December. I'll obviously look at that, but I think the law should stand as it is right now.
Right back.
First, I'd like to say I'm not running away from Nancy Pelosi. I will support anyone that has good policies for this district, and I will oppose anyone that doesn't, and that has nothing to do with party. As far as don't ask, don't tell, there was another policy that would have hurt morale in our military, and that was the segregation or desegregation of our military way back in the 60s. And they had the exact same excuses then that they're having right now, and I think our troops will be just fine.
Okay, Ms. Ford.
My question is with regard to immigration, obviously a very difficult topic in this entire country, but especially here in Central Washington. There is an established Hispanic population. So I'd like to know where you both stand on the issue and how you think changes to the immigration law could benefit us here in this district.
Well, first thing we obviously need to do is control our borders. And I'm not talking only about the southern border, I'm talking about the northern borders. I think that's a national security issue, and that has to be part of any comprehensive immigration reform. In the time that I've been working on this issue, my focus has always been on how it relates to our labor-intensive agriculture that we have here in Central Washington. Our crops have always, at least the labor-intensive crops, have always been worked by a mobile labor force. It's always been that way. And the guest worker provisions that were put in the 1986 Act simply was not sufficient enough. And so my focus has always been then, and on immigration reform, to get a guest worker program that is workable, to allow people to come into this country on a legal basis, work crops, and go back home if they choose. I think that is the proper way in order to deal with this immigration reform. The sad problem is that in the last 4 years, there has not even been a hearing in the House on this issue with the Pelosi-led Democrats. There hasn't even been a hearing on this issue. But I think that the focus, and my focus will always be for the economy in our area, and that focus ought to be a workable guest worker program.
I think it's great that he's so focused on this. I'd actually like to see him propose a bill on this issue because he complains a lot that no one does, and that's actually his job. So I will say that I agree with a lot of what he's saying. I agree that the first step is our borders, and that's a national security issue that has very little to do with immigration, actually. But one effect that it will have if we pass a comprehensive immigration reform is to bring a lot of people out of the shadows. It will lower crime rates simply because people won't be afraid to talk to policemen anymore. When a crime happens in their communities, they're more likely to report those crimes if they know they're not going to get arrested if somebody shows up to their house. So that's one thing. Also, I think that it's important that we have guest worker programs. So, like Representative Hastings said, that people can come and go, because we have an artificial population of folks in this country that would very much like to go home after the growing season, but they're afraid if they do, they won't be able to come back. So that's my answer.
I would just like to say we need to recognize that the greatness of our country is that we are largely a country based on immigrants coming to this land of the free. And so we ought to look at that from a positive standpoint and not a negative standpoint. But there are proper procedures by which people should come to our country, and so that should be our immigration policy.
Okay.
I have a question regarding the federal stimulus spending. I know the leadership in the Republican Party has been very critical of the Obama administration's handling of stimulus money, and they would like to see any unspent money, and that would include Hanford cleanup funds, be returned to help pay down the debt. Do you favor that idea?
I absolutely do not. because I work with people that are benefiting from that stimulus money. I have plenty of coworkers that would not be at Hanford and contributing to our local economy if it were not for that stimulus project. Not to mention the fact that we have accelerated the cleanup project out at Hanford by years. And the faster we accelerate the process, the faster that we can invite private companies to come in and hopefully, in my opinion, set up manufacturing hubs in this area to offset the jobs that are going to be lost when Hanford starts to ramp down. So I absolutely do not favor returning stimulus money. We need to let it run its course, let it create jobs, let it help our communities, let it help our small businesses in these tough economic times.
We here in the Tri-Cities should not be held hostage to an $800 billion stimulus package for some spending on programs that would normally happen over a course of time. To be sure, keep in mind, the stimulus package was designed to stimulate the economy, the private economy. Nationwide, the unemployment rate was 7% when the stimulus was passed, and now it's hovering around 10% nationwide. All we have come up with is a huge, huge debt that we're passing on to our children and our grandchildren. I think that is exactly the wrong way to go. And ironically, in the paper just last week, there was a news story that said that out at Hanford, they're opening up a job source site for those workers when stimulus dollars end. I thought the stimulus dollars were supposed to create permanent jobs. The fact is they didn't do that. So I have worked very hard to have level funding for Hanford in the time that I have been in Congress. And to be sure, these jobs did work. But what happens now when you have that experienced workforce, all of a sudden, if the stimulus dollars end, which it could happen, then these jobs go away and then you have to go through the whole retraining program. This is precisely the issue that I was concerned about when I opposed the stimulus spending in the first place, even though I know that Hanford got some of those dollars out here.
Thank you.
I think it was interesting that when the stimulus bill was being passed, Representative Hastings' argument for not to avoid layoffs out at Hanford was to not to create the jobs in the first place. And for me, this is money that's in our economy. It's in your small businesses. It's in my family and friends of small businesses, and it's important to our economy. Now, one ironic thing is that Representative Hastings has been a champion for the tax cut for the rich, which will be a $700 billion tax break for the richest Americans. So I guess if you want to pay for the stimulus, then allow the tax to revert back to its original state for the rich, and I would pay for it.
There you go. The next question comes from the audience, and it will be Mr. Hastings' turn first. Mexico, tariffs, apples, 3 key words. What will you do about them? What is your plan?
Well, let's understand that we have a trade agreement with Mexico, and the Democrat-controlled Congress last year unilaterally negated a portion of that dealing with Mexican trucks. In retaliation, the Mexican government imposed tariffs on our apples, our biggest export market, I might add. So this is simply the work. In fact, Jimmy Hoffa, the president of the Teamsters Union, said that he is very proud that this provision got put in place. But the fact of the matter is that this was a treaty. It was something that was a work in progress, and it was unilaterally negated by the United States. Nobody knew the provision was even in the bill when it passed. And so now real people are potentially being hurt here in Central Washington because of these tariffs. But make no mistake about it, it was the labor bosses in Washington, D.C. that took credit for that, and now we've had a plant in Prosser, a potato processing plant, that has closed down because of this action, and because our market now has a 25% tariff, that could hurt our compatibility with other, especially South American countries. So we will be harmed here. Why? Because the labor bosses did not want to have Mexican trucks on a pilot program come into the United States. I think that is wrong, and it should be corrected.
Thank you. Okay.
I agree. It's a horrible situation, and it's one that could have been avoided if Representative Hastings had been doing his job. If Representative Hastings had been opening up markets overseas for our locally grown produce, grains, and livestock in the beginning of his tenure, we wouldn't be in the situation we are right now. For example, when our cherries were stopped from being imported into Japan, I think it was 1.5 years ago, it was the governor that had to step in with help from the Commerce Department to get those cherries and that market back open. It wasn't Representative Hastings, our representative, it was the governor over in Olympia. So I do sympathize with the farmers, and I have been advocating for opening up markets overseas since the beginning of this campaign. Now, what I've been saying is that when the Mexican government can wrest control of their government back from the drug kingpins and from the drug cartels, then we can talk about them bringing their trucks onto our road. But right now, I don't think we should be bowing to the demands of a foreign country simply because of a trade agreement that, frankly, is outdated. They're finding all kinds of new ways to put drugs and human cargo into passenger cars. What will they be able to do with a 16-ton truck? And so when they can secure their country, when they can take back control of their country, we can have a conversation about having their vehicles on our roads. But until then, it's not safe and it's not the right path.
Well, apparently his answer is to cave into the Teamsters Union and tell our growers to go sell your apples someplace else. For goodness sakes, what sort of an answer is that? The point is that this issue is hurting our growers here in this area because that is a large market, particularly for apples. But I find it rather curious too that gentleman talks about opening trade agreements, yet we can't. There are 3 trade agreements that are pending right now. We can't even get a vote on that on the House floor. I think it would pass because of the Pelosi leadership. She won't even bring these votes to the floor, and those votes would largely benefit our agriculture community. But it just seems to me that in this case here, okay, I'll cave into the Teamsters Union. They can have it, and we just have to go sell our apples someplace else. I think that is a short-sighted response.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me, sir. Would you please give us a little quiet here, please? We will go back to our panelists, and Mr. Friday and Mr. Clough will be the first person to answer. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Clough, what is your position on the current health care reform that is now in law, that's signed into law primarily along partisan lines? What's your position? My position is that I'm not happy with it. To be frank, I'm not happy with it because it only addresses one of many different issues of our rising healthcare costs. It addresses the insurance problem, and that's I think accounts for something like 3% of our overall healthcare costs. But it doesn't address tort reform. It doesn't address pharmaceutical companies that are abusing us. And so I would like to see a plan that incorporates all 3 of those things. Because right now we have doctors that are living in fear that if they prescribe the wrong drug or they do the wrong procedure or if they don't do a procedure, they're going to get sued. And we have a system right now where pharmaceutical companies are marketing directly to consumers who are not doctors, most of them. And so when you go into your doctor's office and you say, I want whatever drug, your doctor has a choice. He can give you that drug, or he can allow you to go down the street to somebody else. Or he can not give you a drug and maybe you'll get sick and then you'll sue him. So I think all 3 of those things are necessary in order to have a comprehensive health care reform bill, so I'm not happy with the way it was handled. But I will be fighting to make sure that those other aspects of what I consider to be necessary to be included in any future legislation. Before the question is kicked over to Congressman Hastings, would you have voted for it? The current bill? Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. When he was asked this, I'm glad that my opponent said that, because he was asked if he would have voted for the bill, and he said absolutely when it passed the House. Here is the issue with Obamacare, and I alluded to that in my opening remarks. If the issue is people not having enough health insurance, then to me the obvious solution to that is to open up opportunities for people to buy health insurance. For example, If you could purchase health care policies across state lines, you'll have a number of opportunities of people coming in wanting your business with different plans. That's your choice. We could expand health savings accounts, which is the fastest growing part of the healthcare industry, because it puts people in charge of their healthcare delivery systems. We should allow small businesses to band together to buy a policy so they can be at least on parity with big corporations. We should have tax parity for individual policies. And of course, we should have tort reform because every state that has passed tort reform has reduced the cost. Now, every one of those solutions that I just suggested to you cost nothing. Cost nothing. But what we have now is a system that is put in place that has restricted choices. And I fear, because of every place that's been tried across the globe, it has led to a rationing of health care in a government-run system. I will vote to repeal Obamacare.
I think it's great that he wants to allow corporations to do the right thing. Unfortunately, there are 19,200 people in this district alone, 19,200 people in this district alone, that even if they were millionaires could never get insurance because they have pre-existing conditions. And he hasn't given us a solution for that. As far as going across state lines, I'm all for it, as long as there's parity. Because right now, every one of you probably have a credit card, or maybe some of you don't, but all those credit cards, they are coming from 1 or 2 different states. And why is that? Because those states have the laxest laws. So if we're going to have a cross-state line commerce of healthcare, there needs to be a parity as far as what's available. Now, I will tell you that there are 107,000 people in this district that don't have health care, and there are $63 million of uncompensated care to our local clinics and hospital. And guess what? Every one of you in this audience are paying for it either directly or indirectly every time you pay your premium. So we can either solve the problem or we can keep using partisanship to stall this issue, but eventually we have got to solve this problem.
Representative Hastings, there is a very strong anti-incumbent sentiment in this country right now. So as a congressman who has been in office for nearly 2 decades, how do you defend your time in Washington, and what have you done that has directly impacted the people who live here in Central Washington?
Well, first of all, the mood of the country is, while all incumbents have to be judged every 2 years, and listen, that's the way our system is, and I have been very pleased in the time that I've been in office that the people have returned me to office. But I can tell you who is really at risk in this election. It is the people across the country that have supported the Obama-Pelosi plan that has led our country into these huge, massive deficits that we have in this country. And I just think that's why we have these midterm elections. I said in my opening statement that I respect the people, American people that made a choice in 2008. That's the way our system is. But the beauty of our system is we have these checks and balances. And the checks and balances, for the first checks and balances, are the midterm election. That's why this election, in my view, is nothing more than a referendum on Obama's first 2 years in office. But let me list some of the accomplishments that I have mentioned to go directly to your question. When the 300 area was transitioning, there was hundreds of scientific jobs that were at risk at PNNL. I assisted in that easy transition, and no jobs were lost whatsoever. I was the author of the legislation that created the Office of River Protection so we could focus on the tanks and get that radioactive waste out and vitrify it and send it to Yucca Mountain. I was the author of legislation that created the Market Access Program, which is extremely important for our agriculture industry to market crops overseas. There are a number of these issues, and I am very, very proud of my record in the time that I have had the privilege to serve you in Congress.
Well, I'm glad he's proud of his record because it makes my job a lot easier. Representative Hastings doesn't like to talk about this very much, but he voted 5 times in 6 years to raise our debt ceiling. The debt goes to your children and my children and our grandchildren. That is Representative Hastings' voting record. Representative Hastings has passed and been signed into law a total of 6 bills in 16 years. That's his voting record. He has written and passed the House 82 bills. I'll give him that. 82 bills, and only 6 of those were bipartisan enough to get past the Senate. So if we're going to talk about legislative record, then we should also talk about what leadership role he's been playing in D.C. He holds no leadership within his own party, even though he has seniority. Although there are other members that have less seniority that hold leadership, like, for example, Kathy McMorris Rogers, his seatmate. He does not hold any serious positions of authority on multiple committees. He sits on one committee. As a matter of fact, he's the only one on that committee to only sit on one committee. Even the chair of that committee sits on more than one committee. But Representative Hastings feels as though that one ranking position on the House Natural Resources Committee, which is an important committee, is enough for the entire district's problems. All of our problems can be solved with that one committee. When he only sits on one committee, he's limiting your voice. He's never sit on the Ag Committee. He's never sit on the Energy and Commerce Committee. He's never sit on the Veterans Committee. He's never sit on the Small Business Committee. He's sitting on one committee. Where's your voice? $174,000 a year, and that's what we're getting.
What hasn't been pointed out, which is only part of the story, in the late 90s, we ran surpluses, and I proudly supported those surpluses. We paid that down $500 billion in debt. Then came 9/11, and we were attacked. And I felt it was important from a national security standpoint, because the economy shuttered. I felt it was important that we beef up our security to secure our country. And so I voted for spending, deficit spending. But there was a reason. It was for national security purposes. You tell me what the reasons are to run out a stimulus package of $800 billion, a cap and tax of $800 billion, maybe a second stimulus, all of the bailouts. All of these are the issues, of course, that is not being discussed, at least in length, like they should be. But I will say this. There is nowhere near the deficits that we ran securing our country after 9/11 that even come close to these trillion-plus dollar deficits back-to-back that we have. That's what this election is about.
Okay. Mr.
Question that comes up, I had the privilege of watching the Nevada senatorial debate between Harry Reid and Sharon Engel talking about Yucca Mountain. And he basically said that Yucca Mountain is dead as an issue, that it's not going to resurface again. He says Nevada never made any money off of Yucca Mountain, and the future of Yucca Mountain as a wayside is gone. What would you do to correct that, or to in fact provide the kind of legislation that would make sure that we at least maintain some traction in terms of getting the issue solved with regards to nuclear waste?
I actually work in the field, so I understand the science of it. And I'll tell you that President Obama and Senator Reid are absolutely wrong on this issue. And in fact, I wrote a piece on this on my website, and I encourage you to go check it out. I wrote it months ago about this issue. It goes into detail why it's so important that we keep Yucca Mountain open. And Nevada did get a lot of money and a lot of jobs from that. And they are now reneging on their promise because it's politically inconvenient for Senator Reid. Now, I will tell you that I am the very first one to point out the problems with my party using politics over science. I am not an overtly partisan person. I am someone that believes in policy over politics. And so this is an issue where my party is absolutely wrong, and I have told them that. What I would do is continue to fight for Yucca Mountain. It's not dead until they tear the thing down. I'm going to continue fighting for it and making sure that there is a place for our spent fuel, because if we don't solve this problem within the next 10 years, we will have overflowing fuel pools all over this nation. We have a lot of waste, and we need to do something with it, and we cannot wait another 30 years for them to decide on another place and to build it.
What is going on with Yucca Mountain is symbolic, I believe, of what disturbs the American people. Because Yucca Mountain was established by the Congress. It is in law. The Congress voted on that well over 20 years to say that's going to be our national repository. I can understand maybe people in Nevada not being all enthralled with that, but it is the law. It is the law. And so for this administration to try to unilaterally, if you will, take the law in their own hands and say this is not the repository is just simply wrong. Now, Dennis, the answer, the question you ask is what can we do about that? Well, perhaps the election in Nevada would solve part of that problem, but we don't have any control on that. But I am pleased with the bipartisan support that I have had in my opposition to this. Case in point, the individual that I beat in order to win this, when I won the first election here, and I had a joint news conference earlier this year at Hanford because he and I agree, Mr. Inslee, he and I agree on this issue with Yucca Mountain. I co-authored an amendment with the Democrat chairman of the Budget Committee to make sure that Yucca Mountain would be in place, and we were even denied the opportunity to debate that on the floor. But this is politics really at its worst. And this is, like I say, this is somewhat, I think, symbolic of why Americans have a distrust of what's going on with this administration and with that particular senator.
I was in an interview with Mr. Shannon a couple of months ago, and I also applauded Representative Hastings' efforts in making sure that we are fighting to keep that facility open. But I want you to keep in mind that the answers that you're hearing today from that side are almost entirely partisan. And the answers that you're hearing from me are almost entirely bipartisan, because I believe very strongly that you cannot do anything in this country to the level that we need to get our country back on track unless you are able to reach across the aisle. There's no doubt anymore why he's only passed 6 bills. You cannot pass bills if you don't reach across the aisle. And if every answer he's going to give tonight is going to be based along partisan lines, well, that's what you're going to get.
The next question is from the audience. What will you do to ensure growth and development of clean energy technology in post-cleanup Hanford? We'll just begin with you.
I am in favor of an energy policy in this country that I would characterize as all of the above. Obviously, coming from the Northwest, I am very much in favor of hydropower. I'm very much in favor of nuclear power. And this district is unique in the standpoint that it has the alternative energy. We have more wind farms, for example, in this district than any other district in Washington State. There's a solar farm that's going to be potentially put up in Kittitas County, and we have a manufacturer in Moses Lake that manufactures solar parts. So I'm in favor of an all-above energy plan. But I think it is silly and short-sighted of us to ignore the abundance of fossil fuel we have not only in this country, but offshore and in the Intermountain West. The fact of the matter is, this energy policy that we're pursuing, if we pursue an exclusive green policy, puts us, I believe, at risk from a national security standpoint. Because we import right now roughly 2/3 of our crude oil. And 45% of the international oil is controlled by OPEC. If they turn off the spigot, what does that do to our national security and our economy? So I think what we need to do is to utilize all resources. And that certainly means drilling offshore, it means drilling in Alaska, but it includes, obviously, an all-of-the-above energy plan. I think that is by far the best plan for America.
I agree with what he said, except for parts of it. But I was kind of surprised to hear that because Rural Energy Savings Program Act, voted no. Homestar Energy Retrofit Act, not voting. Consolidated Land, Energy, and Aquatic Resource Act of 2010, voted no. To establish a research, development, and technology demonstration program to improve the efficiency of gas turbines used in combined cycle power generation systems, voted no. Solar Technology Roadmap Act, voted no. To provide for a program of research and development and demonstration on natural gas vehicles, voted no. To authorize the designation of national environmental research parks by the Secretary of Energy and for other purposes, voted no. American Clean Energy and Security Act, voted no. Again and again and again. You can have someone that tells you what they really think and gives you a straight answer, or you can have someone that gives you the answer they think you want to hear and then does whatever they want to do in D.C. You may not agree with me on every single issue, but you can guarantee that I will always give you a straight answer. Thank you.
You forgot to mention I voted against the $800 billion cap-and-trade national energy tax, too.
Which I'm against.
Probably every one of those bills that was cited were designed to make winners and losers in our energy market. I am one that believes that there are two ways you can affect an outcome. You can mandate or incentivize. Virtually everything that has come up on energy policy from the Pelosi-led Congress has been mandates, not incentives. I believe in markets. I believe people should go out and take a risk if they think their energy supply is better and go out and try to sell it on the marketplace. That's much better because the consumer always gets the best deal of that because the consumer can pick and choose what energy source they want. I think it's wrong, and again, this is one of the problems that's coming from Washington, D.C. We are mandating everything to everybody with the idea that you don't have any idea to make decisions on your own. I think that's wrong.
Amen. Thank you. Mr. Friday.
Thank you. This is for Mr. Clough. I guess it can go for both Congressman Hastings as well. What are the top 3 goals that you would pursue if elected for this district?
The very first, and I've been talking about this from the very beginning, is bringing green energy manufacturing to the district. And that would mean solar panels. That would mean biomass. That would mean nuclear research. That would mean windmill technology. Right now we're buying a lot of those technologies from overseas, and overseas economies are destroying us in technology. They're just outpacing us because we haven't put the money into research. And so my first priority would be to bring green energy manufacturing jobs to the district in places like Tri-Cities, and that open land that we've been able to clean up, accelerated because of the stimulus package. That's one area. There are areas in Sunnyside and Moses Lake that would be great locations. We have the manpower, we have the brain power, we have the natural resources, we have the cheap energy, and I think we could very easily attract private corporations to come here and do business with us. The second thing I want to do is to open up overseas markets for our agricultural products. I've lived in foreign countries where protectionism is very much a daily aspect of their economy. We have allowed countries like China and Korea and Japan to maintain trade imbalances, some for the sake of post-Korean War or post-World War II helping their economies. And I think it's time for those things to end. And I think it's time to more forcefully ask China to revalue their currency that makes our products more attractive to their consumers, and also to expand broadband communication services into rural communities, helping your kids and my kids to compete on a level playing field with children from Beijing, Tokyo, Seattle, and to help small businesses in those communities to compete in a global economy as well.
One of the most important jobs that I have worked on in the time that I've been in Congress is to ensure that the cleanup at Hanford gets done in a timely manner and meets all the legal obligations that are embodied with the agreements between the state and the federal government. So that obviously is job number one. But looking beyond that, clearly there's life after cleanup. PNNL, the National Lab, is going to be a leader on all of that with all the work that they do out there. I'm very pleased to have been able to work with PNNL to build the new facilities out there, which I think will help us transition to a different economy once cleanup is over with. But we still have to recognize that we are largely an agriculture area here. And because our farmers are getting more and more efficient, and they continue to get efficient, the obvious answer to their well-being is to find markets. And I alluded to the fact that there are 3 pending trade agreements right now. All of them would benefit our agriculture here in Central Washington. And that's something that I have been an advocate of. But the larger issue, I think, that we have to deal with as a U.S. Congress, and we have to do it immediately, is to put some certainty back into the entrepreneurs and the job creators in this country. And we do that by making our tax code a permanent tax code, and we do that by extending the Bush tax cuts so that people can keep more of their money to invest as they see which, so our economy can grow. I think that's absolutely the best way to move our country forward.
I would like to know which country he'd like to borrow the $700 billion from in order to pay for the tax cut for the rich to begin with. On the issue of trade, you know, once again, talking about the importance of trade and actually doing something about it are completely 2 different things. Rare Earths and Critical Minerals Revitalization Act, no. Currency Reform for Fair Trade Act, no. To amend the Internal Revenue Code to close loopholes for corporations that are currently sending jobs overseas? No. America Competes Reauthorization Act, voted no. These are again and again and again, I'm going to keep saying this, you can hire a guy that tells you what you want to hear, or you can hire a guy that's going to tell you the truth, and you can decide for yourself whether or not you like my policies or not.
Candidates, do you believe in term limits? And if so, what should the term limit be?
Okay. You do.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yes, I think, let me answer this by saying one thing right off the top. I do not believe in unilateral disarmament. And by that I mean if everybody is subjected to precisely the same time limit to serve in Congress, I have no problem with that. In fact, in my first term in Congress, I voted for a constitutional amendment that would limit members of the House to 6 terms. A constitutional amendment requires 2/3 votes of the House. It did not get 2/3 votes of the House, so therefore the issue died. But I don't believe it is in the best interest of my constituents to term limit myself when I think that there is work that can be done. That's where I say I don't believe in unilateral disarmament.
Okay.
October 30th, 2008, shortly before the election between Representative Hastings and George Fearing, the editorial board of the Yakima Herald-Republic reported in their paper, I just read it today, that Representative Hastings told the editorial board that he would only run for 5 terms. You know what? They remember it. Most of you here remember it. Most of the TV stations remember it. So Occam's razor says that, you know, if everyone else remembers it, but he doesn't, probably most likely either he's not telling the truth or he forgot. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say that maybe he forgot. I personally believe very strongly in term limits. I've said that from the very beginning of the campaign in one-on-one conversations, but I was hesitant to say it to the media because, well, that's already been ruined. No one's going to believe a politician in this district that says they are for term limits when everyone remembers the same story. But I told the editorial board of the Tri-City Herald that I will not run for the U.S. House of Representatives longer than 10 years. You can write that down, and you can show it to me when I knock on your door on that election and say, nope, sorry, you said you didn't like term limits. And I promise that I won't say that it's a myth like Representative Hastings has.
If anybody should know what I said, you would think it would be me, don't you? Now, there was a great deal of discussion when I first ran about term limits. I did not sign a term limit pledge. I did not sign a term limit pledge. And I don't consider myself as somebody that is doing this forever and ever. In fact, I don't publicize this very much because I don't think it's something that's really between my family and I, but I do not take a congressional pension. I'm one of the few people in Congress that does not take a congressional pension. And I've been able to do this because in my small business, mainly through my brother who managed our pension, he did very well, and I didn't feel that I should take a congressional pension, and so I'll just say that and let it go at that.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Shannon.
This question deals with earmarks. We heard a lot about this in just about every political race in Washington State. For both candidates here, would you support continuation of earmarks, special interest type of money that would come into the 4th Congressional District?
First, I'd like to address the last comment by Representative Hastings. He says he doesn't take a congressional pension from the U.S. government. He does take one from the state government, from his time in the state legislature. So if you don't believe me, go online and check. He does take a state pension. Anyway, as far as earmarks go, I've said from the beginning, I'm on principle not really for earmarks, because I believe if you have a bill that you want to pass, you should get on the floor and you should fight for it. You should build consensus within among your peers, and you should fight for the bill in the House. Now, there are some earmarks that are necessary because they're so narrowly focused, and some of those would be for Hanford or for agricultural products. But I will say that in principle, I'm not for earmarks. I think you should get on the floor and you should fight for them.
I signed the moratorium to not ask for any earmarks, and I think that is again symbolic, clearly, of what America is upset about, and I think rightfully so. But I also believe, in regards to that there ought to be other procedures put in place that I think are frankly more egregious. I think a bill should be online and available for the American people to read it before it's voted on for 72 hours. That simply hasn't been done, and I think that's egregious. If we're going to have transparency in our government, then I think that we have to allow the American people to know what we are doing before we do it. I think the 72-hour layover period is exactly the right way to go, and it's something that I'll certainly be pushing when we get back into Congress.
Okay. The next question.
Don't I get a?
Oh,
yeah, okay.
Sorry.
I would like to say that I agree with the 72 hours, and I will also be doing that. Now, as far as another thing I didn't mention is that I also feel very strongly that if the earmark is not germane to the bill it's attached to, it should not be part of the bill. Just for everyone's reference, though, we can talk about being against earmarks all day long until we're blue in the face. But fiscal year 2010, Representative Hastings, 29 earmarks, $26,425,100. Fiscal year 2009, 28 earmarks, $24,422,250. Fiscal year 2008, 35 earmarks, $23 million, $526,300, for a total in just the last 3 years for $74,373,650. So if we're going to start talking about the budget and we're going to talk about how fiscally conservative we are, perhaps we should reevaluate his stance on earmarks.
We'll have a little change of pace with this audience question. What will you do as our representative to ensure arts education in our schools and arts in our community? And we will begin with Mr. Hastings.
Well, there are some federal programs that deal with that, but I'm going to be very honest with you. We're going to have to look long and hard at all of these programs to see if they are something that truly should be a function of the federal government, or should it be a function of state government, or in fact should they be a function of local governments. And why do I say that? I say that because we are running tremendous deficits, as I mentioned before, trillion-dollar deficits the last 2 years. I think what we have to do is absolutely prioritize our spending, and I think all programs need to be looked at very, very closely. And I think that those programs ought to be looked at, and the reason I opened up the response on which level of government should be responsible, because a lot of the government spending in Washington, D.C. now is something that historically has been better administered at the state and local level. So I think everything has to be looked at, but I acknowledge that there are programs on the federal level that do deal with arts. But I think it's important for us to once again think long-term fiscal health of this country. Because if we don't do this as soon as possible, we are not going to have, next generations aren't going to have all the benefits that we have had for those of us that are sitting here.
I agree, we will have to look really hard at the things that we're spending money on, and we need to be frugal with our money. But let's keep in mind that scientific studies show that a child that learns to play an instrument does better in math, does better in science. A child that is involved in the arts does better in all aspects of education. And if our goal in this society is just to, turn that hamburger wheel and push out kids into the world, then what are we spending all this money on? If we're going to prepare our children for the future of this nation and to be competitive globally, it might be a good idea if they can compete globally with kids from around the world in math and science. And the arts do that. I am a supporter of the arts, and I will continue to be in Congress.